You got this. We're good? Okay. Let's start. Welcome to Progress TV. This is SRHR episode, and we're going to talk about different perspectives when it comes to SRHR in Africa. I would like my panelists to introduce themselves, and my name is Sonke. Yes, I would love to start with you.
So my name is Cynthia and I work for UNAIDS.
And I'm Gertrude. I work with Malawi Research Alliance.
And my name is Bimiko Manyane. I work for Frontline 8.
Hello, my name is Bafana Kumalo. I'm with Sonke Gender Justice and Men Engage Africa.
Thank you so much for coming today. So I would love to start our first question with you, Cynthia. What are the prevailing sentiments regarding access to SRHR services in Africa?
That's a very interesting question. Sentiments regarding SRHR services in Africa. I think if you speak to a lot of the adolescent girls and young women in particular, which is a group that I'm keenly fond of, you hear that they feel that the access could be better. They don't have access to SRHR services for a myriad of reasons. We don't have, in most of the countries and in most of the districts or in most of the communities, we don't have youth-friendly services, and if in a particular country the youth-friendly services are available, you will find that they're only available in the centers, in the urban areas, and not really in the rural communities, closer to where a lot of the adolescent girls and young women are. So that would be one in terms of the access issues. But oftentimes when we talk about access to SRHR services, we tend to focus on adolescent girls and young women. The narrative is really silent for adolescent boys and young men of the same age group. I would really like to hear back from them, because I haven't heard. There's anecdotal tales here and there, but really nothing substantive. And then if you look at policies as well in terms of access to SRHR services for adolescent girls and young women, they're really they're not integrated policies in place. So you will find that an adolescent girl and young woman goes to a clinic to access HIV services, for instance. They'll only be offered that service, HIV testing, and nothing else. And this is a girl who needs contraceptives, who needs HIV testing services, and who also needs other information around SRHR. So they must go to the clinic on Wednesday for HIV testing. Then they must go again on Friday just to access contraceptive. And if you look at the transport costs that are aligned to that, the time costs that are associated with that access to services, it's quite a lot, and it takes a toll on the young women. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that. I love the fact that you mentioned the boys, because most times we're only talking about young women and girls. But when you're talking about universal health coverage, you're talking about like leaving no one behind. So thank you so much for that. And when you're talking about, maybe Gertrude, I can just ask you, because now we're talking about even boys, adolescent boys and young men. How do cultural norms and gender dynamics influence perceptions and experience related to SRHR?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question indeed. I think when it comes to issues of power dynamics, mostly I think it's also a fundamental area where there are so many issues to do with gender equality, issues to do with social norms and cultural norms. And all these things, if you can really look further into them, you see that it's more of cultural values adding more to that, because issues of patriarchal are coming in where more power is given to men, and they even sometimes control the reproductive choices of women. So that also affects our gain outcomes when it comes to SRHR. But also we look at some stigmas and normal cultures that has been normalized in our settings where women do not have a choice, women do not have a voice, even the young boys themselves. They really require a consent on issues to do with their bodies. They require consent from a guardian or someone else who can provide that consent on issues that affect them, issues of body autonomy. So you may look at it as one of the barriers in Africa when it comes to promoting SRHRs. It is not adequately providing that conducive environment for young boys to access SRHR services. And also and may look at issues of masculinity coming in, and I like now the fact that we are now involving more men to take champion in advancing gender equality issues, because that is also one of the area where we can really address issues to do with inequalities, where we take men to champion gender equality interventions. So it is an area that we need to center more, to invest more, to ensure that we are promoting gender equality by investing in men, investing in boys, but also including girls and boys in advancing issues with gender equality.
Thank you so much for that. I love that you're also nodding to me. Like, yes, maybe do you have something to add to that when it comes to just cultural norms and societal norms as well?
Well, I was going to say that interestingly, the R at the end of SRHR is the one that we keep dropping. And it's critical to understand that you cannot achieve access to sexual reproductive health without rights. And whether we look at it from an accountability perspective, the reason why the R is dropped is because governments are not comfortable with being held to account. And it's important to recognize that R is not a nice to have, it's a must have. Because the moment you build accountability around the rights agenda, it means that not only are you empowering especially young people with the power to choose services, but you're also empowering young people with the power to say when services are not met. And so I think for me, part of the prevailing sentiments around SRHR, and even thinking about the link with culture, which is what you were asking me, is important. One of the reasons why we're losing R is because of a prevailing narrative that the R is not synonymous to African culture, which I think is very debatable, because a lot of the premise on African culture has always been around, being able to access what's good for one, right? It's always been about community wellness. And so it's very interesting that when we now talk about access of young people or young people accessing health, we suddenly want to drop the rights conversation. And so in the work that we do when we're looking at programming, and this is why we work with cultural leaders, for example, and we're finding really interesting trends. So there's a prevailing narrative as well that cultural leaders, religious leaders are not progressive. But we're finding in spaces that we are seeing progression. Increasingly, we're working with faith leaders, cultural leaders that are not only supporting SRHR, but are actually even utilizing their daily language to underscore the importance of SRHR. I'll give you an example with work that we're currently doing under Ready Plus. We're working with faith leaders and we're using the biblical text and the Quran. And we're using biblical text because it's something that a lot of communities can understand. And this time it's using biblical text to show the importance of the rights agenda, to really unpack, often what is deemed to be a very discriminatory practice, but to use biblical text towards more of a progression in the SRHR agenda. So I don't buy the concept that our culture is static. It's not. We're increasingly seeing how leaders are supporting, the work that we're doing, they're speaking out. And, the times of when there was denialism, whether it was on HIV or on diversity issues, has now come into the church space, it has come into the cultural space, and we're seeing, these leaders also having to grapple with what kind of language to use. But they're also having congregations, they're having, community members that are also very different. And so the conversations are happening, but I don't want to oversell it. It's not happening at a pace it should be happening. And so there's still a lot of work we need to do around leaving no one behind, but also recognizing that nothing is static. And so culture is dynamic, religion is dynamic, and we need to work with those that are already progressive to also help change the mindsets of those that are left behind.
Thank you so much. Like, I love the fact that you're saying that you are using, the language, simple language that people can be able to understand when it comes to matters to do with sexual and reproductive health and rights. And that is something that very insightful, that one. Maybe I can just ask you, Bafana, how can communities' engagement and civil society advocacy contribute to shaping positive sentiments and driving change in SRHR policy?
You seem to have left the difficult question for me. Well, I wanted to plug in from where Tumi ended that look, there's a lot that needs to be done with what we call social and structural, and that is your faith leaders and traditional leaders. Because these are very important and powerful institutions in our society. We argue in our work that these spaces are what we call sites of struggle. Because you cannot assume that when you work with this sector, they would necessarily agree with the views that you have. But because they've got such important leadership role in communities, they are listened to. Whenever they speak, people, take to heart what they say. But if you work with them strategically, chances are you will get a lot of those progressive ones. And once you get that, it shifts the needle of the conversation. A simple example, if you work progressively with traditional leaders, they open up spaces. There are places we as civil society, when you go, you struggle to make inroads. But if a traditional leader calls a meeting, everybody in the community comes. If a faith leader who have at least once a week a loyal, community that comes to that space, if they open up that space, you have a huge possibility of influencing the thinking around these issues. Now, I think we need to pursue those strategies. What bothers me at the moment is there's a lot of resistance to CSE in our region. This in a region where, just yesterday in South Africa, they released the report, 165,000 children are teenage mothers in 1 year. Teenage mothers. We are talking from ages 10 to 19. Of course, in terms of our law, from the age of 16 at least, there's consent. But from 15 to 10, we are talking about a lot of what we call statutory rapes, which we don't even call them that. Now, we need to change even the language we use. Because when we say we are wanting to change the trajectory about teenage pregnancies, we are almost assuming that there's consent.
Yeah.
It's just that these young girls don't have they have loose morals, they don't control themselves. Yet many of these young girls actually, very few I would suggest it was just an adventure. Not many of us are, I think, honest enough to say that our sexual debut was not when we were married. We all pretend we only had sex when we were married. But the fact of the matter is that sex is not necessarily a bad thing. It's a manner in which it is managed between two consenting adults who understand what is happening. Now, how do we deal with the many of these young women who were now burdened with pregnancy? I'm saying burdened because most often they are left on their own, who were raped, sometimes raped in their home, raped by uncles, raped by teachers, raped by pastors. So we have a lot to do in ensuring that we introduce tools that empower young people to can make the correct decision about what is it that they want to do with their lives. Sometimes people use poverty, in terms of transactional sex. In some instances, it's the parents who send their girls because the uncle brings groceries every month. So we have a huge societal problem that I think we need to reflect. If we are to see appropriate sexual health and rights interventions, it must be a multi-stakeholder engagement. It's not just about the young girls and young adults. It's about society. It's about men coming to the party, understanding the whole jargon around SRHR. There are many men who think, for instance, protection is the role of a woman in reproductive health. Why must it be the role of a woman? You know, if it takes two to tango, shouldn't it take two to tango to also ensure that there's protection, that we think through the implications of what these relationships mean? So we as men are given a free pass, I think, in society generally. When you talk about SRHR, very few people will say bring the men to the conversation. Why is it that young boys laugh when young girls don't have menstrual commodities at school? Why is it that we are not mobilizing young boys to support their sisters and provide these commodities? Because in many of our countries, we know, many of these commodities are very expensive. And so there's a lot that I think we need to do in bringing everybody in the community into this discourse so that we are all singing from the same hymn sheet. Then whatever challenge we have, when it is, you know, all of us coming together, I am sure that we can make a difference.
Thank you so much for that. Yes.
Yeah, I would like to emphasize something that you just said, Bafana. It was Women's Day in South Africa on the 9th, and we were in Mamelodi at a function that was organized by Young Women for Life, an interview of women. And there was a health worker there who was speaking and saying, on average, they see about 3 to 4 young girls between the ages of 10 to 19 pregnant at the clinic. Now that is South Africa. I was in Maputo a few months ago where I went to a certain province where they were saying in a month they see about 7 pregnant young women, 10 to 19 again. Now I want to make this, to connect this to HIV, and I want to connect it to the role of civil society. So if you look at some of the stats in our region, you see that we get about 3,200 new HIV infections among adolescent girls and young women within the age of 10 to 24. I think in South Africa alone, that figure is about 1,000, right? So you also then go to data around teenage pregnancies. You can go to data around GBV. You see that the same group of people that is affected by GBV and gender inequalities is the same group of people that is also influencing high teenage pregnancies. It's also the same group of people that is recording high numbers of HIV and AIDS. It's the same group.
Intersects.
It intersects, right? And then you look at civil society and the way we are structured. You will see that there's a group that is working on gender.
Siloed,
There's a group that is working on HIV. There's a group that is working on, teenage pregnancies. The question is, how do we come together as a movement to serve the young women, the adolescent girls and young women, and
all
of
their
course,
needs.
adolescent boys and young men as well. Holistically, how do we do that? I think if we just spoke amongst ourselves, we would have greater impact. And then something else that Bafana said around the 10 to kind of 15 age group in most countries, which is the pregnancies are not really resulting from consent. There's no consent there. It's statutory rape. But yet that narrative is silent, and it dwindles that accountability factor. This 10 or 15-year-old goes to a clinic, attends antenatal. They are treated like any other normal woman who's just going to seek antenatal services. Not a nurse, not a doctor stops to say, hang on, what does the law say about this? How do I refer this to the relevant authority so that this issue is addressed and there's accountability and justice within the home? That's at the clinic. But this girl, remember, is coming from a home. And these questions are not asked. This girl is in school. She drops out. The teachers don't make the connections. How do we, as a community, as stakeholders, come together? This girl goes to church. Right? And if you bring in the issue of child marriages, for instance, you will see that these girls that are married below the age of 18, sometimes it's officiated in a church by a whole ordained pastor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you wonder why we never really made the necessary connections that need to be made. So really my point is integration at all levels. Movement, cross-movement, cross-fertilization of movements.
Yes.
At the stakeholder level, can we all just talk to each other? Can we make the necessary connections to ensure that we are protecting our adolescent girls and young women?
But I just wanted to add one critical point. What we forget in that whole discourse is that often we as society re-victimize these young girls.
Oh yeah.
You know,
That's right.
if you look at the general conversation in South Africa, it's always demeaning on the young girls. They fall pregnant because they are not wearing the correct clothes.
Yeah.
They like things and what have you. We are almost making these girls to take responsibility for the fact that they've been violated by older men.
Yeah.
Because in many instances it's older men.
Yes.
No one asks the question, if a 10 to 15-year-old is pregnant, why is the man responsible not in jail? Which is what the law says.
Yes.
You know, that conversation never features. You know, you hear a lot of morality. You know, when you push for the introduction of CSC, most of the school boards will say, no, you want to teach our children sex. What they miss to understand is that children are exposed, whether by choice or by omission, already to this environment. All we are seeking is that they must be empowered to can be able to make the correct decisions. Because history shows us when young women are given proper information, including ensuring that they cannot be misled or abused by those that are elderly, for whatever reason, they are able to make the right choices. So we do need, I think, as society, to get back to the drawing board and say, these young women need our support. They need us to nurture them.
Yeah.
They don't need our condemnation. We are the last people to condemn.
Yes.
Because sometimes some of these things happen in front of our eyes. We see Uncle so-and-so, who is very famous in the area, coming to this poor home to pick up this girl. And we all look the other way. Why is that? That we become so desensitized.
Yes.
And yet when we see now the results, we also blame her. No one holds Uncle so-and-so accountable. So there's a lot that I think still needs to be done.
Yes. So how, yes, because the question now is like, how do we bring change? You know, the power of collective action is actually needed. Maybe I can just ask you, Tumi and Gertrude, in what ways can policymakers ensure that SRHR policies are inclusive and are responsive to the needs of marginalized population?
So, you know, every time we talk about legislators, I tend to lose concentration because they're the least held accountable group of people that we're meant to be holding accountable, right? And they get away with it. And as I was listening to the conversation now, I remembered when I was 13, I was part of a youth program. And it's very frustrating to be sitting here again in 2024, recognizing that years later we're still having the same conversations, right? And it makes one really wonder, firstly, what has my role been? You know, have I done anything differently? And is there even potential to impact change? But second, it also speaks to, you know, I think a lot of what we often say around accountability. Lawmakers hold them accountable, but lawmakers seldom make it to Parliament on SRHR. They make it to Parliament on promises of a free meal, a free T-shirt. You know, they come and they speak the jargon and they leave. And I think there are a couple of things we really need to start considering. One is, if a lawmaker makes it into Parliament not having espoused the values around SRHR, we need to question ourselves. But secondly, it's also around education. When I was growing up, there was a lot of focus on civil or civic education for young people. I don't know where that is anymore. So when I was in an SRHR program, there was real education around what it also means to be a young person voting. And so my understanding of even reading manifestos back then was not coming from me being a political person. It came from, are you as a young
Am I
person
represented?
able to understand whether this person will represent your needs?
Yeah.
And I think, as we were talking now about programs being siloed, indeed we are. Because I'm thinking of ready and recognizing that at no point are we talking about voter education through an SRHR or even through an HIV lens. And so it's very difficult to start thinking about holding anybody accountable when they never made the promise to start with, right? And then thirdly, often we are in audiences with people that actually have that audience with the policymakers. So I'm talking about donors, I'm talking about business people, I'm talking about people that are able to influence change. But we also don't have an accountability scorecard for them. So a lot of the work that we do in SRHR is actually foreign funded. And that has come with a lot of good, right? But I often wonder to what extent are the donors and the development partners able to hold our governments accountable? Because a lot of the times we're talking about sustainable financing, we're talking about financing for health. But if our grants, for example, do not have sustainability inbuilt, because often when you write a proposal, SRHR especially, you are met with a couple of challenges. One, we now have programs that run for 2 to 3 years. Show me a program that can effect change in young
Fundamental
people's
change
lives
in 3
that
years.
runs 2 years or 3 years. That doesn't happen, right? And I remember when we had an opportunity to influence that conversation. It was with the Dutch government. And we said, as long as you're running a program for young people, it has to be at a minimum of 5 years or more. And they listened, and they came back and they gave us 6-year funding. And I recognize the Dutch government for doing that because that is not the norm. But again, what are funding partners saying amongst themselves? And what do we say as those that have close proximity to those that fund this cause? When we are in rooms with them, are we worried about our own paychecks? Or are we worried about enforcing change that translates to good programming? I want to end off by giving, again, an example of a program that I went through as a young person. When I was growing up, I didn't know there was a profession of what I am now, running programs. I just knew that I was worried about possibly not making it as a young girl growing up in Uganda at the height of HIV. And I joined a program, and that program kept me for 6 years. So from the age of 13 till 18, I was in a program, and it kept evolving with my needs as I grew older. By the time I exited that program, I did not only have skills around SRHR, I was able to articulate myself better. I had agency, so even the decisions I was making around transactional sex were very different.
Informed.
It was informed decision making, but also I was not under the same pressure because I knew better. And now even in the programs that we run, it's imperative that we don't forget that we're not programming for communities elsewhere. We're programming for our children, for our communities, and for the future generations of who we would have wanted to see. So I think for me, accountability can never just be about the policymakers. Accountability needs to run across. I have to be held accountable as a programmer. I have to recognize where I'm being very siloed in my approach and I'm not working very well with other young people. But most importantly, I have to recognize the privilege that I sometimes have sitting in rooms with people that get to make decisions and to inform that decision making through data, through evidence from the work that we do in the region. But most importantly, through recognizing that the African demographic dividend, which is the young people, needs investment. And it needs investment in ways that are true to that. I'm very tired of hearing people say, don't give young people stipends, don't pay volunteers. it's always funny to me that we always want to save money when it comes to young people.
Yeah, invest in young people, and also we can't be able to hold anyone accountable without the data as well. So that is also very important. So maybe Gertrude, what role do regional and international frameworks play in supporting nations' efforts to enhance SRHR access and rights?
All right, so talking about issues to do with legal formats, I think firstly I always ask myself three questions to say, who makes this legal format? So who develops this legal format? And to who do they have to pray a lot? Or what impact do they have also to the people that are mostly supposed to be benefiting from these laws? So normally these laws, most of the global and regional legal formats are basically developed at such high-level platforms where mostly if you have a deep analysis of who is part of these development processes, you see that the people that are mostly supposed to benefit from these laws are not part and parcel of these decision-making processes. So that's the most area that we miss a lot. I think, and it also affects even the implementation now at national level or at state level when we take the global and even the regional levels. For instance, even when we look at the Maputo Protocol, it specifically talks about issues of SRHR and specifically the critical issue of safe abortion. But then you see that there are several countries they haven't even endorsed access to safe abortion among women under the stated conditions. And even the issue of financing that we have been talking lately, you see that we are still failing even to finance 15% of the national budget to the SRHR sector or to the health sector in general. So you see that the laws or the legal frameworks, global and even the regional global frameworks, they are all more like PowerPointers. Yes, they are supposed to empower individuals. They are supposed to point out the gaps or the challenges that are there on the ground or in the states or at national level. They are also there to support even CSOs to hold the government accountable, of course. But now issues come to implementation of those laws. Are the countries really providing or implementing according to the regional and also global commitments that we have assigned to, or as there are existing gaps that we still need to address? So there are several issues that we need to further look to say that yes, we have been developing several commitments, several treaties, several legal formats, but are these really benefiting the people that are supposed to benefit from these laws? So it's an area of also, as we are forming our advocacy agendas on how best we should promote SRHR and even gender equality, let's look at the existing gaps already that are there when it comes to implementation of these global and regional levels, rather than just developing more of this, yet we are not even implementing the already existing legal frameworks that we have. So it's also an area that we need to invest more to ensure that we are implementing the commitments that we have made at global and even at regional level, to the state and to the national level.
Thank you so much for that, because also diverse population encounter diverse challenges as well. So we should also try to, to bridge the gaps as well. So maybe I can just ask you, Cynthia, how can we effectively amplify youth voices in the SRHR discourse to ensure their perspectives are integrated into policy making processes?
Yeah, thank you very much. Before I respond to that, I would like to add my voice to the issue of the global instruments that are actually developed. I think to me, the session that we ended on, I think, was around CSW Resolution 60/2, which is one of the global commitments that are there. And we're not short of those. At SADC level, with the SADC model law, we've got the CSW resolution, and then we've got the SRHR ministerial commitments for youth and well-being, for young people. But the other, in as much as we always say that these instruments are there to actually set a standard that the countries in some cases can actually tap into and develop their own laws, in particular for the case of the SADC model law, which is not really a binding instrument in any way. So they are there for countries to actually tap in and set their own laws alongside that. The question that I would like to ask is, again, I go back to collective action. Who knows about this? For instance, I'd like to give an example of the CSW UN resolution. It is a resolution that is discussed within the gender space. And yet this is a resolution that touches on issues of HIV for women and the girl child. But it is championed by colleagues and stakeholders within the gender space. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that how are we tapping into other stakeholders who should have an interest in that instrument? And in the case of the CSW resolution, it is HIV, it is SRHR, it is education, it is economic justice. And if you listen carefully in this conversation, I think it was Tumi or was it Bavana who mentioned something around economic empowerment and the intergenerational transactional sex that is going on, which puts the issue of the economic inequalities and economic issues at the heart of a lot of the things that we are grappling with, certainly HIV, certainly teenage pregnancies, right? It puts it at the heart of that. And yet, we don't tap into the whole economic justice movement. We could leverage on the power that is in the economic justice movement and shed some light on the link that to adolescent girls and young women and how we can empower that. But going back to the question that I was asked, and I see that I've got 2 minutes. I don't know how I can respond to such a powerful question in 2 minutes in terms of collective. But I think we've said it all in terms of the integration, the collectiveness of youth voices, not only in SRHR, not only in HIV, not only in gender, but also tapping into movements that we don't normally tap into, the economic justice movement that I just mentioned here. And I know there's a whole Gen Z, we are in Nairobi now, they can lead us. Let the youth lead. I shouldn't be sitting here and talking about these things. Yeah, I'm almost a dinosaur. Gen Z is at this conference, we should be talking about it. So let us listen to them, let them lead. Let youth involvement and youth participation not just be tokenistic. It should start from when we are planning. The youth should be the champion. They should come to us seeking support. You know, when you are young, we are made to do all sorts of things that make mistakes. When you make a mistake, you're either corrected by your elders, or when you are struggling, you go to your mother, to your grandmother, and seek counsel and support. This is how it should play out. They should be in the lead. They should be at the back, providing the support that is required. There's a lot of potential. I mean, Gen Z has just shown us in Kenya the possibilities and opportunities that are out there.
Yes, maybe we can just give our final our parting shot, because now time is not on our side. Maybe we can just start with you, Bafana.
Well, I think we all agree that there's lots of policies, very progressive policies. But as I always remind colleagues, policies don't implement themselves. This is where we come in. We need to agitate for duty bearers to live up to their commitments. But secondly, I like what you were saying. We need to ensure that we engage with multi-stakeholders from communities so that people understand these policies. A policy that is sitting in a shelf somewhere is not useful to anybody. So we need to empower communities so that they understand what are their rights, what policies are available, what are they speaking to, and then find ways of coordinating efforts to ensure that these policies are implemented. To get the policies to be implemented requires all of us, to make sure that we are vigilant, to make sure that we monitor that duty bearers do what they are supposed to do. And I like the idea of the Gen Z. I think we need to trust our young people. Young people are often told we are the leaders of tomorrow. I argue young people are the leaders today. Many of us need to sit back and listen to young people. Young people have got ideas. They are creative, they have energy, they have the numbers. All we need to do is to support.
Thank you so much for that. Yes, Tommy.
I think mine is really simple. I hope, given that we're having this on the sidelines of the SRHR Learning Exchange Symposium, that we also change the narrative and it does not become another talk shop. That believe in the next 3 days with very clear resolutions and commitments of the action that we can all make in our own little spaces. I think often we want to see somebody else being held accountable, and I suppose the time is now for us in Africa to really come up with homegrown solutions around SRHR response and to find all the different touch points that we can tomorrow come back and say from that time, this is what I have changed in the space that I have or within the sphere of control that I have. And I think sometimes we forget that even in our own little ways, our change or the change that we're able to effect does compound and it can become something big. So my parting shot is, much as we want to hold others accountable, maybe the time really is right for us to start thinking about what can we do differently and to hold us to commit to that.
Thank you so much for that. Yes, Gertrude.
Sure. So I think I'll center more on the investments. I think now it's really high time that we need to invest more resources in the health sector, but also in the young people, because for them to have full support, to be fully equipped with knowledge and also strategies on how they can further engage with like stakeholders to change policies or to review and even to implement those policies. They require enough resources, they require more investment, more trainings, more capacity buildings to enhance them and also to strengthen them to be able to champion SRHR but also gender-equality issues. But also I want to center on investment in the resources now, on financing and also ensuring that we are creating that conducive environment for everyone to easily access SRHR services and not just SRHR but the whole comprehensive package of SRHR so that at least we can be able to reduce some of the negative outcomes that are contributed to lack of resources in the SRHR sector.
Thank you so much, Gertrude. Yes, Cynthia.
Thanks. So I won't go technical. I think my fellow panelists have kind of tackled that. For me, I just want to speak to young women and just say rise. Rise, young
Yes.
women, rise. You know? We live in a world of possibilities. You know? You are the change you want. Nobody's coming to save you. You've got a lot of people supporting you, but you gotta save yourself. Save yourself. Just rise, young woman, rise. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. My parting shot is invest in young people and let them co-create and co-own as well. You know, co-creation and co-owning comes hand in hand. So thank you so much for that. That was all the time we had. Asanteni sana. Thank you so much. I was your host, Wambui. Thank you. Asante. That was